Morning, morning, morning. Good morning. Good morning to you.
And we're back. We're going to be having those conversations on CARICOM, and we're going to be welcoming His Excellency David Comissiong, Barbados' ambassador to CARICOM. Now, before we look at all of the great news that has come out of his week of travels, we're going to focus in on the statement of the Conference of CARICOM Heads in terms of something which is ongoing now, and that is the war and humanitarian crisis in the Ukraine. Good morning to you, Ambassador Comissiong.
Yes, good morning, Wendy. Pleasure to be here.
Yes.
Yes, well, you know, we had our CARICOM Heads of Government conference in Belize on the 1st and 2nd of March. And one of the things discussed was obviously the situation in the Ukraine. A statement was issued, and that that statement really focuses on CARICOM's major foreign policy position, which is that international law must be respected, that the processes outlined in the United Nations Charter must be respected and must be followed. And so the statement basically says that that Russia has flouted those principles and those processes, and that whatever legitimate grounds Russia might have, they need to pursue that grounds through diplomacy and not through warfare. And so our heads of government called on Russia to stop the hostilities, to withdraw, and to engage in a process of diplomacy, talks, negotiations to resolve the situation. We also focus on the racist abuse that was directed at Black and African refugees, both in Ukraine and at some of the borders around Ukraine. And the heads of government pointed out that this is unacceptable. There must be no racial discrimination against any refugee. So that basically was the CARICOM statement that came out of the conference. But of course, that was just one item in a multifaceted conference. I would say that the main issues we dealt with were COVID-19 and our regional response to COVID-19, of course, the CARICOM single market and single economy, our regional food and nutrition program, security, looking at the phenomenon of gun crime within the region, Haiti, what we are going to do to try to resolve that situation in Haiti, COP26 and how we need to follow up in relation to the climate crisis. And finally, the British Virgin Islands, one of our associate member states. We have 5 associate member states. These are Caribbean territories that are still colonies, and their self-governance seems to be under threat. And so we looked at that issue with a view to giving them support and solidarity. I would say that those along with the statement on Ukraine, were perhaps 8 of the major items that we dealt with. Of course, there were others.
Okay. Now, in terms of the COVID-19 and the regional response, we have been seeing country after country after country more or less opening up and doing away with some of the protocols, especially in terms of the travel requirements for visitors to the islands. Was this something that was agreed across the board, or was it a sovereign type position where the individual member countries did what they had to do for the protection of their economies and their people?
No. In fact, I'm glad you raised that. We need to be aware that CARICOM, Caribbean Community, is the mechanism that we set up collectively to be our highest regional policy making organ within the region. We recognize that we are all on a journey together all of our territories coming out of centuries of enslavement, colonialism. We're on a journey to build nations and to build a Caribbean civilization. And sometimes, things that we might think, for example, the COVID-19 protocols that we think are just Barbados national protocols, that's not the case. These things have been worked out at a regional level, led by our institution, our Caribbean Public Health Agency. So yes, what was stressed at the meeting by all of the heads is that COVID is not over, that we must continue to observe the protocols that have been worked out by these regional institutions and that are being applied nationally. CARFA is still keeping a firm eye on travel and the protocols that still have to be applied to keep travel safe. The heads were also very concerned with the ongoing misinformation or disinformation about vaccines, and they said that they're going to make another effort to counteract the misinformation because the vaccines are still very important. And in fact, they're going to look at the possibility of how we can manufacture our own vaccines in the region. So the message coming out from our heads is that COVID-19 is definitely not over, and this is no time really for us to let down our guard. Yes, we have to open back up economic activity, but we still have to do so while maintaining some basic protocols and trying to keep ourselves safe.
In terms of talking about the manufacture of our own vaccines, did Cuba and its vaccine perhaps factor into those discussions?
Well, the Cuban situation was mentioned, but we have been hoping for months now that the Cuban vaccine would get the green light from the World Health Organization. For whatever reason, that has not happened. So that has been a disappointment. There are some CARICOM countries like St. Vincent and the Grenadines, for example, have gone ahead and accepted use the Cuban vaccine. But others like Barbados we have a protocol where we depend on the World Health Organization to first give the green light. That has caused us not to access the Cuban vaccine thus far. So I'm not quite clear why the Cuban vaccine, why it's taken so long for the Cuban vaccine to get that green light. So while that was mentioned, our focus really was on how can CARICOM develop our own facilities for manufacturing vaccines going forward.
Okay.
This is going to be explored.
Now, you also mentioned that the single market and economy was one of the major issues on the table. Now, we have been hearing CSME for years, but we still aren't at that central position in terms of our monetary structures.
Yeah. Well, we often talk about the implementation deficit. Decisions are made, the heads come together, they make decisions, and then sometimes the implementation of those decisions are held up. Quite often they're held up because one or two countries, for whatever reason, drag their feet. Sometimes they're forever consulting about the implementation mechanisms. And so a very important thing was done at this conference. At this conference, we agreed to amend the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas to provide for a mechanism called enhanced cooperation. Enhanced cooperation says, look, where a decision has been taken and we are lagging, we are lapsing with implementing it, that a number of countries can come together. 3, 4, 5 countries can come together and can say, look, we are ready to go ahead. And they present that proposal to the heads of government, they get the green light, and so they can go ahead. That we don't have to wait for everybody to be on board. A coalition of the willing can start the ball rolling, and then when the others are ready to join, they will join in. So that was agreed upon.
Aren't you afraid
was
that
agreed
might
upon.
cause some elements of fragmentation in terms of how things go and maybe impact in some ways adversely on trade between the islands?
No, we don't think there's any real danger of that because remember, um, what will be subject to enhanced cooperation is where there's already a unanimous decision
Okay.
for something to be done. So get this, so a unanimous decision has been made by heads. Then for whatever reason, the implementation of that decision is taken unduly long. And usually because there are one or two who are dragging their feet. So it's nothing controversial. It has already been decided unanimously. So if a coalition of the willing say, look, we are ready, everybody might not be ready to implement, but we are ready to implement, give us the green light to go ahead. And again, um, they will be given the green light by the heads to go ahead. And then when you are ready, you can join in. So we don't think
Okay.
there's any real danger of fragmenting, but it is going to fast track um, the implementation. Also, a very important decision at this conference was that we have finally appointed a head of government who will have responsibility within CARICOM for industrial development. It's strange that I mean we have heads that have we have this kind of cabinet system within CARICOM. So we have people for transportation, we have people for CSME. Barbados has control of CSME. Agriculture, Guyana has control of agriculture. We never had one for industry, developing industry in our region. We have now appointed Suriname to lead that prime ministerial subcommittee on industrial development. And the CARICOM Secretariat has been instructed to identify 10 non-food items that we are importing into our region that we have the capacity to produce, to manufacture for ourselves. So you're going to see, coming out of COVID, there has been a greater appreciation that we have to be more self-reliant, we have to produce more for ourselves, we have to be more resilient. The president of Guyana, he is leading the agriculture and food security task force, and he gave a very encouraging report. He's done a lot of work. He's actually set up a unit within the Guyana Ministry of Agriculture to work on this regional program. And so we're going to have an investor finance raising conference in Guyana in May to raise capital funds to go towards agricultural development, because the plan is that we must reduce the region's food import bill by 25% by the year 2025. The other thing on the
Okay.
CSME front is the reduction of the roaming charges within the region.
Yes,
We
we
were
heard
very
that
happy.
and we were very excited about that part of it. And I'm happy to hear that we're looking at our food bills, because once the import price is no longer there, it means that we, the average consumer, can be able to have those goods at a lower price. So we're thankful for that. Sounds like you had a full plate in those couple days that you were traveling for the CARICOM Heads of Government in meeting in Brazil. So we're happy to hear all the agenda items and that Belize, sorry. We're happy to hear the item, what has happened in Belize, and that we are looking at specific industries now going forward. So I want to thank you for joining me here this morning. We didn't get to touch on your visit to Ghana, but I'm sure we'll get to do that in another session of our CARICOM conversations. Ambassador Comissiong, I want to thank you again for joining us, and I want you to have a blessed morning and a happy weekend as it comes up.
Thank you, Wendy. Same to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so kindly.